My name is Tori Myers, and I was 32 the night my whole family turned pale at a party I was hosting. The story really starts 7 years earlier at a Sunday dinner in Seattle. That was the night my parents handed my boyfriend to my sister over pot roast, like passing a serving dish down the table. They said she was the better choice. She had a real career. I had a mixing board and a good ear. And to them that was the same as having nothing at all. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just started packing. None of them knew who I'd walk in beside 5 years later in front of everyone who mattered, or what one taped-up song would do to a room they could never afford to walk into late again. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people meet the moment everything finally turns. If you've ever been measured by your paycheck and found wanting, you're in the right place. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Back then, I was 25 and working the late shift at a small recording studio off Aurora Avenue. I ran the board for podcasters, voiceover actors, and the occasional band that could scrape together $200 a night. I was good at it. I could hear a flat vocal before the singer finished the first line. I could find the one frequency making a mix sound muddy and pull it out clean. My boss called me the best set of ears he'd hired in a decade. My family called it my phase. That was the word my mother used. Sharon. She'd say it the way other people said the flu. How's the studio phase going, sweetheart? My father Glenn didn't even ask. He'd just nod at me the way you nod at a kid still deciding what to be. And then he'd turn to my sister and light up. Rachel was 2 years older and a pharmacist. Steady paycheck, white coat, a name badge with letters after it. In our family, those letters meant you were a person. A career wasn't something you loved. It was a wall you built between yourself and disaster. I didn't understand yet why disaster felt so close to them, why every choice had to be measured against the worst possible year. I just knew that in our house, love came stapled to a job title, and mine apparently didn't qualify. I told myself it didn't bother me. I was wrong about that. The way you're wrong about a sound you've stopped noticing because it never stops. Sunday dinner was not optional in the Mears house. 6 o'clock every week. No excuses. My mother would accept. Sharon ran those dinners like a small gossadaro. And her favorite tool was the place cards. She wrote them by hand in blue ink on little folded cards she kept in a drawer. Most families don't assign seats at their own kitchen table. We did, and the seats never changed. My father at the head, my mother to his right, Rachel beside her, close enough to touch, and me every single week at the far end, the chair nearest the kitchen where you got up to refill the gravy and nobody thanked you for it. I was a grown woman with a job and a lease, and I still got the kid seat. I noticed it once out loud around 23. Why am I always down here by the stove? I asked. My mother didn't even look up. Because someone has to be close to the kitchen, she said. And Rachel's always so tired from work. Rachel smiled into her water glass. Work. The magic word again. I told myself the seat didn't matter, that it was just a chair, just a card with my name and my mother's neat handwriting. It always mattered. A table tells you everything about where you stand in a family long before anyone says it. I just hadn't learned yet to read mine. I would. And years later in a different city, I'd be the one holding the pen that decided who sat where. I'd been with Brandon for 3 years by then. He was easy to love and easy to worry about. He sold insurance badly and changed jobs the way other people changed playlists. His paychecks came in waves, and so did his confidence. But he was warm, and he laughed at my jokes. And on good nights, he'd lie on the studio floor while I mixed and tell me my work sounded like rain. I thought we were building something. My family saw a man one bad quarter away from sleeping in his car. They weren't entirely wrong about Brandon. That was the trouble. My mother started small. He's such a sweet boy, she'd say. But a man needs to provide, Tori. Then she'd let it sit. The next week it was Rachel's hospital is hiring and billing. Brandon should apply. Brandon, who hated being managed, started staying for 2 helpings of Sunday dinner. Started agreeing with my father about the housing market. Started looking at my sister, who never worried about rent. The way a cold man looks at a fireplace. I saw it happening. I want you to know that I wasn't a girl who missed the obvious. I just believe that loving someone 3 years bought you a vote in your own life. In my family, it didn't. There were no votes at that table. There was only my mother counting and the rest of us learning the math. It happened on an ordinary Sunday between the pot roast and the pie. Brandon was there and Rachel. And I had no idea I was about to watch my own life get reassigned at the table. My father set down his fork and cleared his throat the way he did before announcements. "We've been talking," he said, and the "we" already told me I wasn't in it. He looked at Brandon, not at me. A man your age needs to think about stability, about a future he can count on. Then he glanced down the table toward Rachel and back, and the whole sentence finished itself before he said it. "Rachel's settled. She's settled and she's steady." My mother jumped in, gentle as a knife, going in slow. "We just think you two make more sense, dear." Tori, still finding herself. Brandon didn't argue. That was the part that broke something. He looked at his plate. Rachel looked at Brandon and my father said, "The line I would carry for 7 years. The line that decided everything that came after. Plain as weather. She's better. She has a real career." Nobody asked me to leave the table. They just kept talking like I wasn't sitting at it. I held my water glass and felt the room rearrange itself around a decision that had clearly been made days ago in a kitchen without me. This wasn't an accident of one dinner. It was a plan served warm, and I was the only one at the table who hadn't been told. I need to back up and tell you about Eli because he matters more than anyone in this story, and you won't understand the ending without him. Eli Brooks came through the studio about 7 years ago back when I was still trying to build a life in Seattle. He was a songwriter, broke in the cheerful way only 26-year-olds can be, recording demos on time he could barely pay for. Most musicians who walked in wanted me to make them sound like someone famous. Eli wanted to sound like himself, only clearer. We worked well together. He'd play something half-finished-ish, and I'd hear where it wanted to go, and he'd grin like I'd read his mind. One night around 2 o'clock in the morning, mixing a song nobody had asked for, he stopped and looked at me. "Your ears are a gift, right?" he said. "Most engineers hear sound. You hear what the song is trying to be." Nobody had ever called what I did a gift. My family called it a phase. My boss called it useful. Eli called it a gift at 2 in the morning over a song that would never make a dime and meant it. We were friends. That's all it was then. I promise you. But he was the first person who looked at the thing I loved and saw something worth respecting. So when my family later got their hands on him, it didn't just hurt him. It told me exactly what they were capable of. I didn't know yet what they'd done to Eli. When I found out in a different city, it changed how I understood every Sunday dinner I'd ever sat through. Brandon proposed to Rachel 4 months later. I found out from a group text of all things, a photo of a ring on my sister's hand with a string of heart emojis from aunts I barely spoke to. My mother had clearly orchestrated the announcement the way she orchestrated everything down to the timing. I'll tell you what I didn't do because people always expect a different story here. I didn't cry on the floor. I didn't show up at the engagement party in a red dress to make a scene. I'd watched Brandon drift toward the warm fireplace of my sister's life for months. I'd seen him stop fighting my parents and start agreeing with them. By the time the ring photo landed, the man I'd loved had already left in slow motion, one Sunday at a time. What actually gutted me wasn't losing Brandon. It was the clarity. I finally saw the whole machine of my family in one clean line. They hadn't picked Rachel over me because she was kinder or because Brandon loved her more. They picked her because her career fit on a name badge and mine didn't. To them, I wasn't a person who'd been hurt. I was a bad investment they'd quietly moved money out of. My mother actually called me 2 days later and said, "I hope you can be happy for your sister." Not sorry, happy for, as if I'd lost a coin toss and should be a good sport. That was the call that made up my mind. Not the ring, the phone. I gave my notice at the studio and told my family I was moving to Austin. I'd never been. I just knew it had a music scene, cheaper rent than Seattle, and exactly 0 people who'd ever assign me a seat. I told them at the kitchen table, because of course I did. Where else does a family like mine receive news? My mother sat down her coffee and laughed. Not a cruel laugh, which was somehow worse. A patient one, the laugh you give a child announcing they'll run away and live in a tree. "Austin," she said, "with what exactly?" "Your gift." The word came out with little quotation marks around it. Then she said the thing I'd hear in my head for the next 5 years, calm as a weather report. "You'll be back. People like you always come back." I asked her what she meant by people like you. She told me people who chase feelings instead of facts. People who think wanting something is the same as earning it. My father studied his hands. Rachel wasn't there. And under all of it, just for a second, I saw something real in my mother's face. Something close to fear, like she was watching her own younger self walk out a door and into a bad year. I almost felt for her. Almost. Then she picked her coffee back up. I packed 2 suitcases and my studio monitors, the good ones, the only thing I'd ever spent real money on. I drove out of Seattle on a gray Tuesday. I never moved back. Not once. Austin did not roll out a carpet for me. Why would it? I was a nobody from a colder city with 2 suitcases and a pair of speakers. I rented half a garage from a guy named Dale who restored motorcycles in the other half, which meant half my early sessions have a faint engine rumble buried in the low end if you know where to listen. I took any work I could. Wedding videos that needed audio cleanup. A true crime podcaster who paid in installments. A church choir that paid in casseroles. I slept maybe 5 hours a night for the better part of a year. I learned to fix a vocal recorded on a phone in a bathroom. I learned the business side. I'd never had to think about contracts, splits, who owns what, when a song makes money. And here's the strange thing about a place where nobody knows your last name. There was no one to tell me this was a phase. No one assigning me the seat by the stove. For the first time in my life, the only person measuring me was me, and I turned out to be a fairer judge than my mother ever was. It was the hardest, freest year I'd ever lived. I didn't know it yet, but I was building the exact thing that would one day make 4 people go silent in a room full of strangers. I was just too tired and too broke at the time to imagine it. Mostly, I was learning that you can survive losing the people who never saw you. You can do better than survive. I have to tell you what my family did to Eli because I didn't fully know it myself until later, and it's the hinge the whole story turns on. That same year, while things were already going quietly wrong with Brandon, I'd brought Eli to a Sunday dinner, just as a friend, a talented friend I was proud of. My mother sat him at the far end of the table next to me, in the stove seats, of course. She was polite through the salad. Then somewhere around the main course, she asked what he did, and Eli, honest to a fault, said he was a musician trying to make it. I watched my mother's face close like a shop at night. By dessert, she decided. She stood up to clear plates, and as she reached past him for the dish, she said it lightly, almost kindly, which made it land harder. "People like you don't sit at this table." My father asked Eli to head out a little early, said it had been a long week. Eli left without a word, the way proud people leave. Afterward, my parents spent an hour explaining to me that boys like that were a black hole, that I should be careful, that my phase was bad enough without dragging in someone worse. Eli stopped returning my texts within the month. He left Seattle that spring. I assumed I'd done something. I spent years half believing I'd lost a good friend to my own carelessness. I hadn't. My family had quietly run him off, the same way they'd later hand Brandon to Rachel. I just didn't have all the pieces yet. Austin was about to hand them to me. I found him again at an open mic on a Tuesday, 18 months into my Austin life. I'd gone for the cheap tacos and free music, not expecting anything. A guy got up with an acoustic guitar, no introduction, and started playing. And I knew the voice before I placed the face. It was Eli, older, leaner, better. The room half listened the way open mic rooms do, but I sat straight up because I could hear what the song was trying to be, and it was trying to be something real. Afterward, I cornered him by the bar and we just stared at each other. Seattle, he said finally, like a password. We talked until they turned the lights up. I learned he'd been in Austin for almost 3 years, gigging, scraping, getting nowhere because he had songs but no machine behind them. And slowly, comparing notes, we put it together. The dinner, the seat by the stove, the line my mother said while clearing plates. He'd carried it for years, too. That exact sentence, word for word. We'd both been told in our own ways that we didn't belong at the table. We'd both believed it. Sitting in that loud little bar, I felt something cold in me turn warm and useful, like a tool I'd forgotten I owned. 2 people the same family had thrown out in the same city, both still standing. We started meeting weekly. He'd bring songs. I'd bring ears. Neither of us said the word business yet, but it was already there in the room, waiting for us to be brave enough to name it. One night, Eli pulled a folded yellowed sheet of paper out of his guitar case and slid it across the table to me. It was a song handwritten. The ink faded at the creases from years of folding and unfolding. Underdog, he said. I wrote it the week your family threw me out. I read it. It wasn't bitter. That's what got me. It was a song about being counted out and showing up anyway. Written by a kid who'd just been told he didn't belong anywhere good. And at the bottom corner, in different ink, in a hand I'd have known blindfolded, were 5 words that turned my stomach. Get a real job, kid. My father had written that. Glenn had picked up Eli's lyric sheet that night, read it, and scrolled his little verdict in the margin before handing it back like a graded test. Eli had kept it for 7 years. Not to nurse the wound, he said, to remember the sound of being underestimated so he'd recognize it coming. I sat there holding a song my father had insulted in writing, and I heard the whole thing finished in my head. The strings, the build, the room full of people it deserved. This is it, I told him. This is the whole thing. He didn't understand yet. I barely did. But I knew that sheet of paper wasn't trash my father had graded and dismissed. It was a blueprint. Everything we were about to build, we'd build on the exact song my family had laughed at. We even had the name already. It was written across the top in a hopeful 26-year-old's hand. Underdog. Our first real win wasn't Eli. It was a 16-year-old named Priya who sang like she was 40 and heartbroken, whose demo had been rejected by every label that bothered to reply. We weren't a label yet. We were 2 broke people with a garage and an opinion. But I cleaned up her recording until you could hear the catch in her voice, and Eli helped her shape the arrangement, and we pushed it to every playlist curator whose email we could find. One said yes, just one. The song landed on a mid-size editorial playlist, the kind that doesn't make you famous, but does make your phone buzz for the first time in your life. Priya called us crying. Within a week, she had 3 meetings with people who'd ignored her for a year. We hadn't taken a cent. We just couldn't watch another talented person get told they didn't belong. If I can stop here for 1 second, I know what it's like to have the work you love called a phase, to be measured by a paycheck and found wanting. If that's ever been you, if someone in your life got your worth wrong, stay with me. The part where they find out, where the whole room finds out is coming. Hit subscribe so it doesn't slip past you. Because watching Priya's name climb that chart, I understood what Eli and I were actually for. Not revenge. Not yet, anyway. Something better. We were going to be the table the throwaways got to sit at, and we were going to build it ourselves, board by board, so no one could ever assign us the seat by the stove again. We made it official on a Thursday in a strip mall lawyer's office that smelled like burnt coffee. Underdog Music LLC, 2 members, 50-50, no asterisks, no silent partner, no family money because we had none. I want you to picture this clearly because it's the thing to hold on to for the rest of the story. 2 signatures on a page, mine and Eli's, side by side in blue ink. Equals. The lawyer slid the formation documents across the desk and I signed my full legal name. Tori Myers, the same name my mother used to write on a folded card and stick at the end of a table. This time the name meant I owned something, not a seat. Someone gave me a company. We drove the papers back to the garage and Eli did something I'll never forget. He pulled out the old Underdog lyric sheet, the one with my father's 5-word verdict in the corner, and he taped it to the wall above the mixing board, right at eye level. So, we never forget who told us we couldn't, he said. I asked if it bothered him, looking at Glenn's handwriting every day. He shook his head. It's not his anymore, he said. It's ours now. And he was right. The signed papers in the drawer and the taped-up song on the wall were the 2 halves of the same fact. We had built something real, legal, ours out of the exact thing 2 people in Seattle had thrown in the trash. Everything that happened after the growth, the gala, the 4 pale faces came from that Thursday. 2 signatures, 1 taped-up song. That's how a family's leftovers became a company they'd one day come begging to. Underdog grew faster than 2 tired people could comfortably handle. Priya's success brought other artists, the kind the big labels call developing, which is industry for not worth the trouble yet. We made them our entire trouble. By year 3, we had a roster, a real studio with no motorcycle in it, and 4 employees who actually got paid on time. And here's where I have to be honest about myself because I wasn't all calm and dignified behind the scenes. I worked like the company would vanish if I blinked. 18-hour days. I answered emails at 3 o'clock in the morning. I made myself the person every problem ran through. Because if I was indispensable, no one could ever decide I didn't belong. That's the thing my family left in me. Not sadness. A motor that wouldn't shut off. Eli noticed before I did. You don't have to earn the right to exist here, Tori. He told me once after I'd skipped sleep for the 3rd night running. You already own the building. I brushed it off. I told myself I was being responsible. The truth was I'd turned the wound into a work ethic and called it virtue. I didn't return a single call from Seattle in those years. My mother left 2 voicemails. I deleted them without listening. Not out of strength, if I'm honest, out of self-protection. I built walls out of work and told myself they were doors. I'd find out at the worst possible time that a door left even slightly open is still a door. And my family was very, very good at finding the smallest opening in anyone's defenses. The news from Seattle came in pieces, the way it does when you've cut the cord but not quite burned it. A cousin who still followed me online, an old studio coworker who texted out of nowhere. Slowly, a picture formed, and it was not the picture my parents had paid for. Rachel and Brandon's marriage was struggling. 5 years in, no scandal, just the slow grind of 2 people who'd been arranged rather than chosen. And Brandon, the safe bet, the man with a future you could count on, had done the one thing my parents swore he never would. He'd quit. He left the steady job, decided in his late 30s that he wanted to work in music after all, and started a little artist management company. He was, by every account I got, struggling, chasing the exact dream my family had punished me for chasing, only 10 years late and without the ears for it. I thought about my father's line, the one that sent me out of Seattle. She's better. She has a real career. I rolled it around in my head. Rachel still had her white coat and her name badge, sure, but the marriage they'd built her on was hollow, and the safe man they'd handed her had jumped ship for the unstable life they'd called beneath them. The words that had once felt like a verdict now just sounded like a guess that didn't age well. I didn't gloat. I want you to believe that I was too busy. But I did feel the ground shift, the quiet sense that the people who'd graded my whole life had been working from the wrong rubric the entire time. By the 5th year, people in the industry knew Underdog, not as the biggest name, but as the one with a reputation that mattered more to me than size. We were known as the label that didn't strip its artists for parts. Fair splits. Real development. Musicians who'd been chewed up elsewhere came to us specifically because we treated them like people, not inventory. A trade magazine ran a piece calling us the most artist-first shop in Texas. And I taped that to the wall, too, right next to my father's 5 words because the contrast made me laugh. We decided to throw a gala for the 5-year anniversary. Not a vanity party, a real one, a showcase with our whole roster performing, press in the room, industry people we wanted to do business with the works. We rented a beautiful old theater downtown. Eli would close the night with a full band version of Underdog. The first time we'd ever performed it live, the song that started everything, finally getting the room it deserved. I threw myself into planning it the way I threw myself into everything. Guest list, sponsors, soundcheck, every detail. I was building the single biggest night of my professional life. And I had no idea that an invitation list I barely glanced at was about to put 4 people from Seattle in the same room as everything I'd become if I'd known. Would I have done anything differently? Honestly, no. By then, I'd stopped arranging my life around their reactions, which is exactly why what happened next hit them so much harder than it hit me. About 6 weeks before the gala, a partnership pitch came in through our general inbox. It was from a management outfit called Cole Artist Group, a small shop I'd never heard of, proposing that Underdog co-sign and fund a slate of their artists. My operations lead, Mara, flagged it as worth a look since we got a dozen of these a month, and most went nowhere. I read the cover letter. It was polished, a little desperate, the kind of pitch a company writes when it needs a bigger partner to survive. The cover letter listed a managing partner I'd never heard of. The founder's own bio was a separate attachment I never opened. That's not carelessness. It's how I work. On a cold pitch, I read exactly one thing first. The artist contracts. Because a company's paperwork tells you the truth, its cover letter is busy hiding. Who ran the place could wait for a meeting. And Cole, sitting alone on a company name with no first name in front of it, didn't go anywhere because I'd built an entire life on not thinking about Seattle, and a common surname on its own has nowhere to land. So, I treated it like any other pitch. I asked Mara to pull their existing artist contract so we could see how they actually treated the people they managed. That's our process. We don't judge a company by its cover letter. We judge it by its paperwork, by what happens to the artist when no one's looking. The contracts came back 2 days later, and the moment I started reading them, the pitch stopped being about a stranger named Cole and became about everything Underdog existed to fight. I still didn't know who he was. I knew what he was doing, and it was the one thing I would never under any circumstances put my company's name behind. The Cole Artist Group contracts were ugly in the specific way that fools nobody who reads them carefully. On the surface, friendly underneath a trap, the management commission was double the standard. The company took a piece of the artist's publishing which a manager has no business touching. There was a clause that let them recoup vague development costs out of an artist's first earnings, costs the artist never got to see itemized. One young singer on their roster had earned real money on a placement and after the math walked away with almost nothing. I'd seen contracts like these before. I'd been protecting artists from them for 5 years. They were the paper version of the thing my family did to people. A friendly hand on the shoulder while the other hand goes through your pockets. A way of telling someone they don't really deserve what they earned. Dressed up as opportunity. Mara watched my face while I read. "We're passing, right?" she said. We were passing. Not because the founder had insulted us. We'd never met. Not out of spite. We were passing because Underdog does not put its name and money behind a deal that treats artists like a resource to be drained. That's not a mood. That's the entire reason the company exists. Taped to the wall above my board in 2 different inks. I told Mara to set a meeting anyway in person at the gala. Industry courtesy. And frankly, I wanted to look the founder in the eye and tell him exactly why the answer was no. I had no idea I was scheduling a meeting with my sister's husband. I want to be clear about something because I've watched these stories before and the heroine always seems to walk into the trap with her eyes closed. I didn't. By the time I agreed to that meeting, I'd already decided to decline. I'd had our attorney write up a clean, kind, ironclad pass. I'd asked Mara to do a deeper background check on Cole Artist Group, standard practice for anyone who wants our name on a deal. Mara ran it and gave it to me the way she always did in one line by the only metric I care about. Small shop, predatory terms, hard pass, she said. I agreed and I never opened the file myself. If I had, I'd have seen the founders' full names spelled out, the years in insurance, the Seattle address. I didn't. For 5 years, I trained myself to judge a company by how it treats its artists and stopped there. And that discipline, the very thing that made me good at this, was exactly what left me blind to who was standing behind the letterhead. So no, I wasn't fooled by the pitch. I wasn't going to fund a single page of it. The only thing I didn't see coming was the human being attached to the letterhead, the name I'd handed to Mara to vet and never read for myself. You can do everything right. Read the contracts, run the check, prepare the no, and still get blindsided by who walked through the door because the trap wasn't in the paperwork. The paperwork I'd already beaten. The ambush was in the room itself, and in the 4 faces that would arrive, expecting to court a faceless company and find me holding the pen instead. I was ready for a bad deal. I was not ready for my family. 3 days before the gala, I sat at my desk with the final seating chart for the theater's reception, and I had to laugh at myself because of all the things to give me a feeling. It was that, a seating chart. The exact instrument my mother had used to put me by the stove every Sunday of my childhood. Now I was the one with the pen. I decided who sat near the stage and who sat near the doors. I decided which up-and-coming artist got placed next to the producer who could change their life and which struggling songwriter got the seat beside Eli so they'd remember the night forever. I wasn't cruel with it. That's not who I'd become. But I felt the full weight of holding it. The woman who'd been told someone has to be close to the kitchen was now drawing the map of an entire room and she was using it to lift people up instead of put them in their place. The Cole Artist Group meeting got a small table off to the side. After the showcase, low priority, a polite slot for a deal I was going to decline. Eli's name went at the head table, of course, beside mine, where it belonged. Co-founders equals. I looked at the chart for a long moment before I sent it to the printer. For the first time in my life, I got to decide who sat where, and I understood finally that the power had never been in the chart. It was in who got to hold the pen and why. My mother held it to make people small. I held it to make a room. 2 days out, Mara forwarded me a request from Cole Artist Group. They'd asked to bring 3 additional guests to the gala listed as family and strategic partners. It's a normal ask. People bring their spouses, their investors, their moral support. I approved it without a second thought and went back to worrying about the sound check. I didn't see the names. They came through Mara's system as +1s on the Cole account, not as individuals I'd recognize. So somewhere in Seattle, 3 people were getting dressed for a party in Austin, believing they were doing a generous, supportive thing, accompanying their son-in-law as he courted some U-panned coming label that might finally make his failing company work. My mother, I'd later learn, told relatives she was helping Brandon with his music business. My father packed his good suit. Rachel came because Brandon asked her to, and because I think some part of her was curious about an industry she'd been told her whole life was beneath the family. None of them knew the label was mine. None of them knew the man closing the show was the boy my mother had told to leave the table. They RSVP'd to my party. They thought their attendance was a favor to a struggling relative. They were walking into the single biggest night of the daughter they'd written off, dressed like guests at a stranger's wedding, about to find out whose house they were actually standing in. I sometimes wonder what that drive to the airport felt like for them. Hopeful, probably generous, even. The cruelest thing about what happened next is that they had no idea it was coming. Neither did I, exactly. But I was the only one in any condition to handle it. The night of the gala, the old theater looked like something out of a better life than the one I'd packed 2 suitcases to escape. Warm light, full bar, 300 people, our entire roster backstage in various states of nerves. I wore a deep green dress and flat shoes because I'd be on my feet all night and because I'd long since stopped dressing to impress anyone but myself. At 8 o'clock, I walked out to the microphone to open the evening, and the room turned toward me, and the host announced me the way I'd written it in the program. Please welcome the founder of Underdog Music, Tori Myers. Founder. The words still landed in my chest every time. I gave a short, dry welcome, thanked the artists, told one joke about the motorcycle in the original garage that got a Rayall laugh, and stepped back so the music could start. I felt good, calm, in command in the quiet way you can only feel in a room you built yourself. And 4 people from Seattle weren't in their seats yet. Their flight had landed late, and they slipped in somewhere during the first set. When the house lights were down, and a 19-year-old with a guitar owned the stage, they'd come to watch Brandon Court of Faceless Company. In the dark, with the music up, they had no idea whose room they'd just walked into. They never heard the host say my name. They never saw me take the stage. From the side of the room in that warm light, I didn't see them yet either. The recognition was still coming. And it wasn't going to happen at a distance under a spotlight. It would happen up close at a small table when a business handshake turned into the longest silence of their lives. I found out they were there during the first break when Mara guided me over toward the Cole Artist Group table for the courtesy meeting I'd been dreading and planning to end in 3 minutes. I was halfway across the floor rehearsing my polite no when I saw them. My father in his good suit, the one he wore to funerals, my mother in pearls scanning the room with a proprietary look she gave any space she entered. Rachel, older, tired around the eyes, and Brandon, standing as I approached, hand half extended for a business handshake, his founder's smile already in place. Then his eyes met mine, and the smile died in stages. I watched it happen. I watched 4 people perform the same calculation at the same time and arrive at the same impossible answer. The founder of Underdog Music, Tori Myers. There Tori, the one who'd been told she'd be back. My mother's face went the specific shade of pale that has nothing to do with light. Her hand drifted up to her pearls. My father sat down slowly, as if his knees had quietly resigned. Rachel made a small sound and Brandon, poor calculating Brandon, looked like a man who just realized he'd flown across the country to ask his ex-girlfriend, the one he'd abandoned over a job title, to please save his failing company. Nobody said the line out loud. They didn't have to. It was already in the air. My mother's prophecy from 7 years back turned completely inside out. You'll be back. People like you always come back. They'd come back to me to a room with my name on the program and my pen behind the seating chart. I stood there in my green dress, perfectly calm, and let the silence do the work my mother had never let me do at her table. For once, I didn't have to refill anyone's gravy. My mother recovered first. She always did. She rose from her chair with her arms half open, the pearls catching the light, and her whole face rearranged itself into warmth, like a stage being reset between scenes. Tori, she breathed. Oh, sweetheart, look at you. Look at all this. She reached for me. I didn't step back, but I didn't step in either. And she had to fold her arms back down into a gesture that pretended it had never been a hug. We had no idea, she went on. We're so proud. We always believed in you. You know we did. 7 years dissolved in her version of events. Just like that. The seat by the stove, the laugh in the kitchen, the line about people like me, gone, edited out, replaced by a mother who'd always believed. My father wouldn't look up from the tablecloth. Rachel was staring at me like I was a stranger wearing her sister's face. And Brandon kept glancing at the stage, at the lights, doing math on whether the deal could still happen. Now I let my mother finish. Then I said evenly, the calmest I'd been all night. It's good to see you. You're a guest here, Mom. That's all tonight is. Not cruel, just true and final. The way a closed door is final. Her smile flickered. She wasn't used to a sentence she couldn't talk around. We came to support Brandon's business, she tried. We thought, I know what you thought, I said. And I left it there because I had a company to run and a show to finish. And because the most powerful thing I'd learned in 5 years was that you don't have to raise your voice to end a conversation. You just have to mean it. Brandon, to his credit or his desperation, still tried. He found me 10 minutes later near the side of the stage, away from the family table. His voice low and fast. Tori, I didn't know it was your company. I swear. But this is good, right? This is fate. You and me, we always understood each other. Underdog and Cole. Think about it. He talked the way drowning men talk. All momentum, no air. I let him finish. Then I gave him the same answer I'd have given any stranger with those contracts. Because that's the point. That's the whole point. Brandon, I read your artist agreements, I said. The doubled commission, the publishing grab, the development costs nobody gets to see. His face changed. We're passing. Underdog doesn't sign deals that treat artists the way I was treated. I watched that last part land and I let it because it was the truest thing I'd say all night and I wanted him to carry it home. Nothing personal, I added. And I meant that, too. It wasn't personal. That was what undid him. He'd flown across the country expecting a reckoning, an ex with an axe to grind, someone he could maybe charm or guilt. Instead, he got a professional reading him his own paperwork and declining on the merits, the way I decline anyone who tried to wring their artists dry. There was no revenge in it for me to enjoy. And somehow that was the most complete victory I could have asked for. I didn't beat Brandon. I just held the line my company was built on, and his deal failed because it deserved to fail. He stood there with nothing to argue against because you can't argue a man out of his principles when he doesn't have any and you do. Then the lights dimmed for the closing set, and I turned toward the stage and the real reveal of the night began. The host stepped to the microphone for the final introduction of the night, and I moved to the edge of the stage where I could see both the spotlight and the Seattle table at once. I wanted to watch their faces. I'm not proud of that, but I'm not sorry either. To close our 5th anniversary, the host said, please welcome the co-founder of Underdog Music, the man behind the song that started it all, Eli Brooks. The band came up and Eli walked out into the light, guitar over his shoulder, and the room rose to its feet before he'd played a note. Because by now, everyone in our world knew exactly who he was. Everyone except 4 people who knew him only as someone else entirely. I watched my mother's hand find her pearls again. I watched the recognition crawl across her face in real time, the way it had crawled across mine the night I learned what she'd done to him. The musician, the boy from the dinner, the one she'd stood up and dismissed while clearing the plates. He was here. He was the co-founder. And in a moment, the host would add the detail that turned the whole night to ash for them. Eli, the host said warmly, also happens to be married to our founder. Married to me. My father's mouth opened and closed. Rachel put her hand over hers. And Eli, who'd kept that lyric sheet for 7 years to remember the sound of being underestimated, looked out over a packed theater on its feet at the head of the very kind of table he'd once been ordered to leave. My mother had said it lightly, almost kindly, while reaching past him for a dish. People like you don't sit at this table. Well, he didn't just sit at the table now. He was at the head of it, and the table was a sold-out theater, and the people on their feet had paid to be in the same room as a man my family had shown the door. My mother found me again before the song started, and this time the warmth was gone. She'd burned through charm and landed on the thing underneath it, which was anger, because anger was always what Sharon reached for when the world refused to be managed. You did this on purpose, she hissed low so the nearby tables couldn't hear. You let us fly out here. You let us walk into. I didn't know you were coming, I said. You came to court a label you didn't know was mine. That's not a trap, Mom. That's just the truth catching up. Her eyes filled fast the way they did when tears were a tool and not a feeling. After everything we did for you, she said, we were trying to protect you. From what? I asked. And for once, she didn't have an answer ready because the honest one from people who chase feelings instead of facts had just walked into a spotlight and gotten a standing ovation. My father still wouldn't look up. He sat with his hands flat on the table, staring at them. An old man in a funeral suit at a celebration that had nothing to do with him. And Rachel, my sister, said the thing that told me she finally understood. I didn't know it would be like this, she said almost to herself. Mom said you'd never make it. She said it for years. There it was, the blueprint in my sister's own voice. My father's verdict from a Sunday table 7 years gone drifted back through my mind. Hollow now. A guess that hadn't survived contact with reality. She's better. She has a real career. Rachel had the career. I had the room. And the only one in our family who still believed the old math was my mother. Standing in her pearls at the edge of my triumph, furious that the daughter she'd discarded had refused to come back small. Then Eli played underdog, and I stopped watching my family and started listening because the song deserved that much from me. It opened quiet, just his voice and the guitar. The same melody he'd written at my parents' kitchen table the week they threw him out. Then the band came in and the strings I'd heard in my head years ago in a garage filled the whole theater. And 300 people who'd been counted out somewhere in their own lives stood and sang the chorus back at him like it was theirs. Because it was. It always had been. It was a song about showing up after you've been told you don't belong. And there is no audience on earth that doesn't have a piece of that in them. My father had scrolled 5 words on this song. Get a real job, kid. And here it was, the real job. Filling a room he'd flown across a country to sit in. I didn't need to say anything to my family. I didn't need a microphone or a speech or a single line of revenge. The song did all of it, and the standing crowd did the rest. And the truth I'd carried out of Seattle in 2 suitcases stood up and made noise on its own. I noticed somewhere in the second chorus that I wasn't angry. I'd expected to be on this night of all nights. But watching Eli at the head of that table, hearing a theater sing a song my family had laughed at, I just felt clean, finished, like a mix that had finally found its balance. I didn't want them ruined. I didn't push for it. I just stopped being the person who had to be small so they could feel large. The song ended. The room roared and I let it. They didn't stay for the reception. I didn't expect them to. My mother left first, fast, pearls and posture intact, already rehearsing the version of the night she'd tell the relatives. Rachel followed, but she paused near me at the door, and what she said surprised me. I'm sorry, Tori, for a lot of it. I told her I appreciated that. I didn't tell her it fixed anything because it didn't and we both knew it. My father was the last to go. Glenn lingered by the coat check while the room emptied and finally he came over and for the first time all night he looked at me directly. He looked old. It's a hell of a thing you built, he said quietly. I should have said something back then at the table. For 1 second I saw it. The real regret. The man under the cowardice and something in me almost softened. Almost. You still could have, I said. Plenty of times. You didn't. He nodded slow, taking the full weight of it, and that was the closest my father ever came to an apology, and it was nowhere near enough, and I made my peace with both of those things at once. He left. I watched the door close behind him and waited to feel the old ache. The little girl by the stove waiting to be chosen. It didn't come. There was just the warm, loud room behind me, full of people I'd chosen and who'd chosen me back and a song still ringing in the rafters. I turned around and walked back into my own party. Eli found me by the head table after the last guests trickled out, his collar loose, that grin from the 2 in the morning garage days back on his face. Well, he said, they came. They came. I agreed. On the table in front of me was my place card printed for the gala. My name in clean black type. Tori Myers, head of the table. I picked it up and turned it over in my fingers, thinking about a different card, folded blue ink, a chair by the stove, a mother who decided where everyone belonged. This card my company had printed. This seat I'd built. Nobody had assigned it to me. I'd drawn the map myself. And then I'd put my own name at the top, not to be above anyone, but because I'd finally stopped waiting to be invited to my own life. Eli put his hand over mine. You okay? He asked. I thought about it honestly, the way I'd learned to in a city where no one knew my last name. Yeah, I said. I really am. And I was, not because I'd beaten them, because I'd stopped needing to. The wound that had run my 18-hour days had quietly closed somewhere during a song, and what was left was just a Thursday's worth of signatures, a taped-up sheet of paper, a man who called my work a gift, and a table I'd built big enough for everyone the world had thrown out. We turned off the lights ourselves. We always did. My family taught me that worth was something you had to be granted, handed down the table by whoever held the pen. But it turns out you can just go build your own table, set it as wide as you want, and decide calmly who gets a seat. That's my story. A seat by the stove, a song they laughed at, and a room that finally got it right. If someone ever measured your worth by a paycheck and got it wrong, let tonight be your sign to stop waiting for permission and build your own table. If this moved you, share it with someone who needs it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.